Can a dog be guilty of a crime under military law? It sounds like the premise of a dystopian novel or a dark satire, doesn't it? We are conditioned to believe that justice is a human construct, reserved for those who possess the cognitive ability to understand right from wrong, duty from disobedience. But what if I told you that in the annals of modern military history, there exists a case file that challenges everything we think we know about loyalty, instinct, and the rigid machinery of war? Imagine a courtroom, not one filled with the chaos of battle, but with the sterile, suffocating silence of judgment. The air is thick with tension. The panel of officers sits high above, their faces unreadable masks of authority. And in the center of the room, standing alone on a cold concrete floor, is not a soldier in uniform, but a Belgian Malinois. His name is Kale. He is decorated, trained, and revered. But on this day, he is not a hero. He is a defendant. This is not a story about animal cruelty in the traditional sense. This is the unbelievable true story of the trial of valor, a legal paradox that blurred the lines between biological instinct and soldierly duty. Kale was accused of desertion in the face of the enemy. The charges were formal. The proceedings were real. The stakes, his life, his service, and his legacy. Why would a military tribunal, bound by centuries of tradition, attempt to prosecute an animal? What specific incident could possibly transform a life-saving asset into a liable entity under the Uniform Code of Military Justice? As we peel back the layers of this shocking event, you will discover that this trial was never really about a dog. It was about us. It was about how we define consciousness, how we value sacrifice, and where we draw the line when the tools of war begin to bleed. You won't believe the verdict, but you will never look at the bond between Handler and Canine the same way again. Before the gavel fell, before the headlines screamed across global news feeds, Kale was simply a soldier. But not just any soldier. He was a Tier 1 asset, a ghost in the machine of modern warfare. Born in the kennels of specialized breeding programs, Kale was engineered for one purpose: detection. His nose could sniff out explosives hidden beneath feet of rubble. His ears could hear the click of a trigger from yards away. To his unit, he was family. To the command structure, he was equipment. This duality defined his existence. He lived in the barracks, slept on the floor beside his handler, Sergeant Marcus Thorne, and ate from the same MREs when supplies were low. Yet, legally, he was property. A serial number tagged to a collar. This isolation wasn't physical. Kale was surrounded by men who loved him but existential. He existed in a limbo where he was trusted with their lives, but denied the agency to make choices. Kale's record was spotless. 3 tours in hostile territories, 12 confirmed saves, 0 incidents. He was the perfect soldier because he did not question orders. He did not feel fear in the human sense. He felt drive. But as we will see, that drive is a double-edged sword. When the mind of the animal intersects with the rigid protocols of the military, the margin for error disappears. Kale was alone in his perfection, unaware that his very nature was about to become the central evidence in a trial that would shake the foundations of military law. The signs were there, subtle fractures in the ice before the break. It started 3 weeks before the incident. During routine training exercises, Kale began to hesitate, not out of disobedience, but out of confusion. The battlefield was changing. The enemy had adapted, using new types of non-metallic explosives that masked their scent with chemical inhibitors designed specifically to confuse canine olfactory senses. Sergeant Thorne noticed it first. Kale would freeze, his body rigid, eyes scanning the horizon, not for threats, but for something unseen. Thorne reported it as environmental stress, a common diagnosis for working dogs in high-altitude, high-stress zones. The veterinary officers prescribed rest and mild sedatives. They treated the symptom, not the cause. But there was another omen, one recorded in the digital logs of Kale's tactical vest. His heart rate variability showed spikes of anxiety during patrols, even in secure zones. The data suggested a psychological burden, a trauma accumulating in the silent spaces between missions. The command ignored these warnings. In the high-stakes narrative of counterinsurgency, downtime was a luxury they couldn't afford. They pushed harder, they demanded more, and in doing so, they tightened the noose around a neck that could not speak to tell them it was choking. The stage was set for a catastrophe born not of malice, but of neglect. The mission was codenamed Iron Veil. The objective, clear a suspected insurgent stronghold in a dense urban sector known for its labyrinthine alleyways and booby-trapped entrances. The team moved in at dawn, the light gray and unforgiving. Cale was in the lead, as always. Sergeant Thorne was 10 paces behind, rifle raised, eyes locked on Cale's tail, the primary signal for danger. For the first hour, the operation was textbook. Cale identified 2 IEDs, allowing the EOD team to neutralize them without incident. The unit advanced deeper into the compound. Then, they reached the courtyard. It was open, exposed, and eerily quiet. Cale stopped. He didn't sit. He didn't bark. He turned around. In the language of military working dogs, turning away from the objective is the ultimate sign of refusal. Thorne signaled forward. Cale whined, a low, guttural sound, and backed away, pressing himself against the wall. Thorne stepped up, trying to guide him, but Cale broke contact. He ran, not toward the enemy but away from the courtyard, retreating to the relative safety of the entry point. In that split second, the mission collapsed. The delay allowed the insurgents to reposition. A firefight erupted. 2 soldiers were wounded. The objective was compromised. The retreat was chaotic. Back at base, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a cold, hard anger. The commanding officer viewed Cale's action not as a warning, but as cowardice. Not as instinct, but as insubordination. The narrative was set before the dust had even settled. Cale hadn't just failed a mission, he had endangered the unit. And in the military, endangerment is a crime. The decision was made. Cale would face a court-martial. The announcement sent shockwaves through the base. A court-martial for a dog? It was unprecedented. Legal scholars scrambled. The Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, had no specific clause for non-human defendants. However, under Article 92, failure to obey an order or regulation is a punishable offense. The prosecution argued that Cale, as a sworn member of the unit, symbolically, was subject to the same disciplinary standards as any infantryman. This legal maneuver revealed the true identity of the defendant. Cale was no longer seen as a partner. He was stripped of his name in the official documents, referred to only as Asset Canine. The defense team, a ragtag group of JAG officers who volunteered pro bono, faced an uphill battle. Their strategy wasn't to prove Cale innocent of the act. He had indeed retreated. Their strategy was to prove he lacked mens rea, the guilty mind. You cannot have intent without consciousness of the law. But the prosecution countered with a chilling argument. If animals can be awarded medals for bravery, can they not be punished for cowardice? They argued that granting honors implies agency. If Cale chose to save lives before, he chose to abandon them now. This philosophical trap captivated the global audience. Leaks to the press turned the case into a media circus. Pundits debated the soul of the military. Animal rights activists protested outside the base gates. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with the weight of history. This wasn't just about Cale. It was about whether the military viewed its canine partners as sentient beings worthy of moral consideration, or as broken tools to be discarded. The identity of the soldier was on trial, and the definition of justice was hanging in the balance. The trial lasted for 6 days. 6 days of grueling testimony that dissected the bond between man and beast. The prosecution called expert witnesses who described Cale's training in clinical mechanical terms. They played videos of his previous successes, framing them as conditioned responses, not acts of heroism. He does not save lives, the prosecutor stated coldly. He executes a program. When the program failed, the asset malfunctioned. Then, the defense called Sergeant Marcus Thorne. The courtroom fell silent as Thorne took the stand. He was a hardened veteran, a man who had seen too much, but as he spoke about Cale, his voice cracked. He described the night before the mission. He described how Cale had refused to eat, how he had trembled not from fear of the enemy, but from a sensory overload that humans couldn't perceive. Thorne testified that the chemical inhibitors used by the enemy didn't just mask the scent. They created a phantom smell, an olfactory hallucination that terrified the dog. Cale didn't run from duty, Thorne said, looking directly at the panel. He ran from a threat he couldn't fight. He tried to tell us. He tried to warn us, and we punished him for listening to his instincts instead of our orders. The moral test extended beyond the courtroom. The public was divided. Half saw Cale as a victim of a bureaucratic machine that demanded impossible perfection. The other half saw him as a liability that proved animals couldn't be trusted in complex combat scenarios. The jury of officers struggled. They were soldiers first, bound by discipline, but they were also handlers, many of them. They looked at Cale, sitting calmly beside his defense attorney, and saw not a criminal, but a confused animal caught in a human war. The tension was palpable. Every question asked was a step toward either redemption or ruin. The defense presented the augmented tactical gear data, showing the spike in cortisol levels and the erratic heart rate that preceded the retreat. It was scientific proof of panic, not defiance. But would science outweigh tradition? As the deliberations dragged on, the pressure mounted from outside the military bubble. The story had gone viral. Justice for Cale was trending worldwide. International animal welfare organizations threatened sanctions against the military branch if Cale was euthanized or dishonorably discharged. Meanwhile, hardline political figures demanded a harsh verdict to maintain discipline and chain of command integrity. The third conflict emerged not in the courtroom, but in the corridors of power. The Department of Defense was caught in a diplomatic nightmare. Allies questioned the ethics of the U.S. military's treatment of working animals. Internally, morale among Canine units plummeted. Handlers refused to deploy, fearing that their partners could be legally prosecuted for instinctual reactions. The military machine was grinding to a halt, paralyzed by a single case. Inside the courtroom, the panel of officers faced their own crisis. They received anonymous threats. They were pressured by superiors to make an example of Cale to restore order. But they were also haunted by the testimony of Sergeant Thorne. The conflict was no longer just about Cale. It was about the future of the K9 program itself. If they convicted Cale, they admitted that dogs were liable entities, opening the door to endless legal complexities. If they acquitted him, they risked appearing soft on discipline. The climax arrived on the 7th day. The presiding officer called for a recess. The wait was agonizing. Outside, the crowds held their breath. Inside, the officers debated fiercely. One officer argued that the law is blind, and the law says disobedience is punishable. Another countered that the law is made by men, for men, and applying it to a dog is a miscarriage of justice. The tension was unbearable. The fate of a silent hero rested on the interpretation of ancient codes in a modern world. The external pressure had forced the military to look in the mirror, and what they saw was unsettling. They realized that by trying to judge a dog, they had judged themselves. The verdict was not guilty, but it came with a caveat. Cale was not reinstated as a combat asset. He was honorably retired. The panel ruled that while Cale's actions disrupted the mission, he lacked the cognitive capacity to form criminal intent. However, the ruling included a scathing rebuke of the command structure for ignoring behavioral health indicators in working animals. This case forced a total rewrite of the regulations regarding military working dogs. The Cale Protocol was established, mandating psychological evaluations and recognizing PTSD in canines. It shifted the paradigm from viewing dogs as equipment to viewing them as sentient partners with rights and protections. Reflecting on this today, we see that Cale's trial was a watershed moment. It challenged us to expand our circle of moral concern. It taught us that loyalty is not just about obedience, it's about trust. And when that trust is broken by ignorance, justice must step in to repair it. Cale lived out his remaining years in peace, adopted by Sergeant Thorne. He never wore a vest again. He never smelled for bombs. He just became a dog. And perhaps, in the end, that was the greatest honor of all. The legacy of the Trial of Valor is not just a legal precedent. It is a reminder that even in the darkest corners of war, humanity is defined by how we treat those who cannot speak for themselves. If this story moved you, please consider supporting our channel. Your engagement helps us uncover more hidden truths. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice is not just for the powerful.